Greetings and welcome to Eminent Reflection. I'm going to go rather quickly over some of the forecasts on the website FiveThirtyEight.com. Specifically, the address is projects.FiveThirtyEight.com/2020-primary-forecast. If I remember to do it, I'll put a link in the description. If I forget, somebody please leave me a comment, and I'll get to that. I would appreciate any feedback on this and suggestions for, would you like me to do more of these in the future? Because this is an ongoing simulation. They run the simulation many times, and then they take averages and they get forecasts from those. So I am going to try to do this rather quickly. Maybe read a little bit of details on how this works, and try to sum up some of what's being said. And I'm going to skip over a lot of the details because otherwise this would be a very, very long video. If somebody wants me to go over it in detail at some point in the future, let me know. I could do that and make a very long video, or I could do a series on a contest by contest basis. I say contest rather than state because some of the contests aren't states. I hope you'll forgive my camera image up in the upper right corner and my logo in the lower right corner, covering up a little bit of the screen. I could have shrunken the image a little to get it away from those, so that they wouldn't cover any of it. But I wanted the text to be as readable as possible on the screen of anyone watching these videos, and so that's why I filled as much of the screen as I could with the image of the page itself. Now this isn't actually showing the whole page. There is a section of the page over on the left. I'm looking at this on a laptop computer, and if I click on this, I can show you basically what I'm looking at over on the left. There's some other information there. In this case, it's showing the dates of upcoming elections, and I'll try to remember to read those dates off as I go. There's other information that shows up over there, which I could read as well, but I'm, again, going to try to keep this short and simple. And in individual contests, they have two ways of giving the odds predicted. You might notice over here it says Sanders 2 in 5, and underneath it says in parentheses 37%. The 37% is the more that's the latest predicted odds. 37% is the more precise number. The 2 and 5 is more of a rounded ratio or fraction. Notice it's showing 37% as 2 and 5, and it's showing 36% as 1 and 3. Well, if you calculate the ratio 2 and 5 to a percentage, you would get 40%, not 37%. And 1 and 3 would be 33 point repeated 3%, not 36%. So again, like I said, those ratios are rounded versions of the percentage. The percentage, I'm guessing, is a rounded version of a percentage. In other words, it might be like 37.14529%, but they're just showing 37% as an example. The question here on the screen. Oh, by the way, this is according to the web page, updated as of February 13th, 2020 at 12:54 a.m. That's Eastern time. I'm in Pacific time, so it's not my time zone. And It is updated periodically. Some features of the page aren't working right now, and I'm not sure why, so I will try to avoid using them. Also, if you use this page, be careful of certain things. If you, for example, point at one of the lines for a particular candidate on a graph, it may change what it's showing on other parts of the screen, so just be aware of that. And that's one of the things that isn't working properly right now. It'll end up showing the name of the candidate, and it should be showing information about that candidate, but it's not. It's leaving that information at whatever candidate is predicted to win that particular contest. Now, I'm not going to go over the two contests that are already done, Iowa and New Hampshire. Bernie Sanders won those. Pete Buttigieg came in second on both of those, or by some measures you could say they tied on both of those. And the narrative that the Democratic Party and a lot of the media seems to be giving, as well as Buttigieg's campaign at least was giving, is that Pete Buttigieg won. What we do know is that those results are messed up. The math isn't right. There were delegates, pledged national delegates given to Pete Buttigieg that the places that gave them to him shouldn't have been able to. I think two of them, as I understand it. And they're saying they can't correct that. We'll see what actually happens. I mean, are they going to try to give us some semblance of fairness in the end on that? We'll see. But like I said, I'm going to leave those alone for now. Hopefully we'll get that recanvassing done in Iowa eventually, and we can have some better idea of what the actual results are there, and maybe then it'll be worth going back and revisiting those. But for now, let's look to the future, because that's what this site is all about. And it's not my site. I didn't make it. But I think it's a useful site. They're actually running a simulation repeatedly, and then taking the averages of those simulations, who won in each run of the simulation, and how they won, and coming up with the results that are being shown here. So for the question of how each candidate's chances of winning more than half the pledged delegates have changed over time, this is the graph that we're looking at here. Bernie Sanders with a 37% chance of winning more than half the pledged delegates, a 36% chance that no one will win more than half the pledged delegates. Now that is up significantly since the New Hampshire primary. It was quite a bit lower, the chance of no one winning the pledged delegates before, half the pledged delegates before that. And again, it's a simulation. It's not perfect. It's got its quirks, and as I understand it, they're working on trying to make it more accurate. I can't speak for how well that will work out, or exactly how they're doing it. But if you go to the site, you can read a lot of the stuff that they have to say about it, and I would actually recommend that people do that. If you know of other simulations, I'd appreciate if you make comments. Let me know. Let other people who might watch this video know. And if you like this, share it with other people. Maybe click the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. I have very few subscribers on my Eminent Reflection YouTube channel right now. More would be nice. So, moving on. I'm going to just scroll down here to this other graph. This one is predicted. This one shows the predicted number of delegates at each point along the process, and you might notice that it kind of goes in a staircase fashion, and if you point at any point along the way, it shows a label at the top saying what that point represents, and that's why it's in a staircase fashion, because there are specific contests happening at each of those points. Iowa is the first one. No pledged delegates happened before Iowa. And then, of course, New Hampshire. Iowa and New Hampshire, there are very few delegates actually to be given out in those states, and that's why these lines are all way down at the bottom, because of the total number of delegates that can be given out throughout the primary season. Very few of them are given out in those two contests. Nevada, again, not many to be gained there. Now, these small early states are still important because they give people an idea of what kind of momentum a candidate might have. But keep in mind that we, the people, set this momentum. We make the odds. Yes, we can pay attention to what somebody says the odds are, or what a simulation like this says the odds are. But in the end, what the simulation is trying to simulate is us, what we choose to do. And if we choose to do something that the simulation isn't counting on, then the simulation will be wrong. So, if you like what the simulation is predicting, then do whatever the simulation was expecting you to do, and you'll get that. But, how do you know what the simulation is expecting you to do? My suggestion is vote for whoever you think is best. Voting for the lesser of two evils, by the way, is worse than not voting at all, in my opinion. Vote for the lesser of two evils is voting for evil. I don't know any better way to put it. If you don't vote at all, that's 100% error in your vote, and I definitely wouldn't recommend that. I'd rather you write in a candidate that you really like, or better yet, if there's a candidate you really like on the ballot, vote for that candidate. One that you actually support, even if just a little bit. Rather than voting for someone that you don't support as an alternative to another one that you don't support. Because if you actually vote for someone you don't support, you're increasing the chances that we will collectively elect someone you don't support. And yes, this happens a lot. And I know you can't stop other people from doing it, but you can stop you from doing it. And remember, the other people can't stop you from doing it either, but you can. So, if we want to do what is collectively best for all of us, we, as many of us as we can get to do it, should stop voting for the lesser of two evils and vote for whoever we think is best, regardless what the odds say. Now, not everybody's going to do that, but more of us doing it is better. That's all I'm saying. You make up your own mind what you're going to do. Now, when we get over here to South Carolina, again, not many pledged delegates given out by that point. Then we reach Super Tuesday, which is March 3rd. At that point, there are quite a few contests that happen on the same day, and a lot of delegates are given out at that point, including California, which is the state I'm in, which I know in the general election has more electors than any other state, and I'm pretty sure also has more delegates in the primaries to be given out than any other state, quite a bit more if I'm not mistaken. I'm not a Democrat. I am independent, so don't expect me to know all the details of the Democratic Party and their process. I probably know more than the average person. I wouldn't say I know more than the average Democrat. I might, but, not going to venture to guess on that. I know as much as I feel I need to know. Otherwise, I'd be researching and finding out more, which I might still, but limited time. Now, again, I'm taking up too much time explaining all of this. I'm going to just go ahead and move on. But I did want to point out that what it's predicting right now, by the end, by after the contest at the Virgin Islands, which is the last contest of all of them, on June 6th. At that point, the average of the forecasts is showing Bernie Sanders with 1,546 pledged delegates. Now, this is not counting the super delegates, by the way. This is just the pledged delegates. And if anybody gets more than half of the pledged delegates, the way the DNC's rules are set up right now, the super delegates don't even get to vote. Super delegates, by the way, super delegates shouldn't even be considered delegates, because delegating is a thing. There's a definition of what it means to delegate and what a delegate is, and super delegates do not fit the definition of a delegate, because you're not asking super delegates to go out and represent you, or to vote on your behalf in the Democratic National Convention or anything like that. That's what the pledged delegates do. If your state elects a particular person, then those pledged delegates are supposed to go to the convention and vote for that candidate. Super delegates are all in it for themselves, which means they are free to vote for whoever they want. That means they get to do if they get to vote at all, they get to do in the national convention what you get to do in a voting booth, where you might be one of, depending on the size of your state, maybe millions of people voting on one of various candidates. They're one of a much smaller group, and their vote counts a lot more than your vote does. So if you want democracy of any kind, if you want anything resembling democracy, they really should not get to do that at all. And again, if anybody gets more than half of the pledged delegates, there won't be a second round of votes, or at least there's not supposed to be at that point, and the super delegates will therefore not get to vote, because they don't get to vote in the first round anymore like they used to. Again, Bernie Sanders has a reasonable chance, about a 1/3 chance of that. I didn't show that in the other graph. I can go back up and do that, I suppose. Oh, that is what it was showing. Yeah. Oh, it says 2 in 5. Yeah. So slightly better than a 1 in 3 chance of winning more than half of the delegates. You can select up here, and you can change that to show what the chances are of a plurality of votes. In this case, Bernie's got a 53% chance of getting a plurality of votes, meaning getting more votes than any other not votes, delegates. A plurality of pledged delegates, meaning getting more pledged delegates than any other candidate. Notice when you're doing more than half of pledged delegates, there's a chance of no one getting that. There isn't a chance of no one getting a plurality of pledged delegates. Somebody's going to get more than anybody else did, or at least somebody might tie with someone else for more pledged delegates than anyone else. So, any rate, moving back down here. So, yeah, it's showing Sanders with an average of 1,546, and this stuff way over on the right here, that actually shows the likelihood of that candidate reaching certain numbers of pledged delegates. Notice Biden, it's showing his highest chance of basically getting 0 or nearly 0 pledged delegates. On the average, it's showing him with 937 pledged delegates. He could get much higher than that, but he basically maxes out at a much lower number than Bernie Sanders maxes out at. So this simulation is really expecting Bernie Sanders to do much better than Joe Biden. And by the way, as I understand it, this is not made by a Bernie supporter or a progressive. It's actually a conservative, and the person who made it, they can feel free, if they see this video, to correct me if I'm wrong about that, or anybody who knows better if I'm mistaken, but that is my understanding. So yeah, there's a huge gap there between the number of delegates expected for Bernie Sanders to get and the number of delegates expected for Biden to get, and again, a huge gap between those two, and what the simulation is currently showing as third place expected for delegates, which would be Bloomberg, and and a very small gap between Bloomberg and Buttigieg and Warren, and then Klobuchar. It's showing way down at the bottom, and everybody else way below her, basically flatlining. So that's that. I'm going to go ahead and just move on to the event that's coming up on February 22nd, which is the Nevada Caucus. The Nevada Caucus is, it says Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 38% of the vote in Nevada. In 80% of simulations, he had between 20% and 56% of the vote. He has a 2 in 3 chance, more precisely 63%, of winning the most votes, much better than the second most likely winner, Biden, who has 1 in 5, or more precisely 19% chance. Again, they're getting these ratios of 2 in 3 and 1 in 5 from the percentages. So from here on, I'm going to try to just skip the ratios and just give the percentages. May or may not succeed in doing that each time, because it's like right there in front of me. It's easy to just read it as I go. There is a description on the page of how the votes are turned into delegates. I'm not going to go over those right now, because again, I want to keep this reasonably short. So again, if anybody wants me to go into this stuff in more detail, comment, let me know. So moving on to February 29th, South Carolina. Who will win the South Carolina primary? And I'm going to read this in a shorter form, and just sort of a summary. Sanders is forecasted to win 30% of the vote in South Carolina. He has a 45% chance of winning the most votes, slightly better than Biden, who has a 40% chance. So 45% chance of Bernie Sanders getting the most votes in South Carolina, 40% chance of Biden getting the most votes in South Carolina. Moving on, and that is, by the way, as I understand it, that's South Carolina is what Biden is banking on, basically having a landslide in. If he doesn't basically have a landslide there, I think he's pretty much wiped out. So we'll see. It looks to me like he's hoping to use black people in South Carolina to, well, I shouldn't even say something like that. It's what it looks like to me. Like people are getting used who've been used too much already historically, and it's just not a very nice thing in my opinion. But this isn't about my opinion, so yeah, moving on. The next contest after February 29th, South Carolina, is going to be Super Tuesday. That's March 3rd, Tuesday, March 3rd. And there are several states involved in that, so let's have a look at those, starting with California, where I am. Who will win the California primaries? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 31% of the votes in California. He has a 65% chance of winning the most votes, much better than the second most likely winner, Biden, who has a 15% chance. Moving on to Texas. Who will win the Texas primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 27% of the vote in Texas. He has a 48% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 26% chance. This isn't, by the way, just comparing Sanders and Biden. It's just that so far Sanders has been the one that is predicting most likely and Biden second most likely. It's not like that for all contests in here. I'm not sure as of the latest update exactly where it's at, but the last time I checked, there were 2 contests in which Bernie Sanders wasn't the most likely to win. And at least one, I think, where he was the first most likely and somebody else was second most likely rather than Biden. So again, these things may change. The simulation is ran repeatedly. So moving on. Sanders is forecasted to win 27% of the vote in Texas. He has a 48% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 26% chance. Who will win the North Carolina primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 27% of the vote in North Carolina. He has a 42% chance of winning the most votes, slightly better than Biden, who has a 33% chance. Who will win the Virginia primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 27% of the votes in Virginia. He has a 44% chance of winning the most votes, again, according to this simulation, a bit better than Biden, who has a 1 in 3 chance, 32% chance there. I read the ratio. I told you that might happen once in a while. Trying to avoid that, just to save time. Massachusetts. Who will win the Massachusetts primary? Again, Sanders is expected to win. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 27% of the vote in Massachusetts. He has a 46% chance of winning the most votes of any candidate, a bit better than the second most likely winner, Warren, who has a 26% chance. Moving on to Minnesota. Who will win the Minnesota primary? Sanders is forecasted to win 23% of the vote in Minnesota. He has a 34% chance of winning the most votes, essentially tied with the second most likely winner, Klobuchar, who has a 33% chance. So yeah, 34%, 33%, pretty close. They're calling that essentially tied. Colorado. Who will win the Colorado primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 30% of the vote in Colorado. He has a 58% chance of winning the most votes, so better than half. Much better than the second most likely winner, Biden, who has an 18% chance. Tennessee. Also a Super Tuesday contest. Who will win the Tennessee primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 27% of the vote in Tennessee. He has a 45% chance of winning the most votes. A bit better than Biden, who has a 27% chance. Alabama. No, in this case, another Super Tuesday contest. Is showing Biden as most likely to win in Alabama. At this stage in the simulation, again, this might change. It says Biden is forecasted to win an average of 26% of the vote in Alabama. He has a 43% chance of winning the most votes, slightly better than the second most likely winner, Sanders, who has a 33% chance. So moving on to the next contest, it's Oklahoma, also a Super Tuesday contest. Now, the order these are in, I'm not sure why they're in that particular order. They're all on the same day. I don't know if that has to do with the time that they're supposed to start or what. I don't think it would be the time because it's showing California first in the list, which would, since California's in Pacific time, to be ahead of the other ones, that would have to mean it would be much earlier in the day because they're 3 hours behind East Coast. But I don't know. But at any rate, continue on. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 23% of the vote in Oklahoma. He has a 37% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 26% chance. Who will win the Arkansas primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 25% of the vote in Arkansas. He has a 36% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 23% chance. So 36% chance of Bernie getting the most votes in Arkansas, 23% chance of Biden getting the most votes in Arkansas. Continuing on, the Utah primary, also a Super Tuesday contest. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 31% of the vote in Utah. He has a 63% chance of winning the most votes, much better than the second most likely winner, Biden, who has a 14% chance. So, yeah, that's a pretty huge difference there. And Maine, also a Super Tuesday contest. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 31% of the vote in Maine. He has a 54% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Biden, who has an 18% chance. And I believe this is the last one on the list for Super Tuesday, Vermont. This is Bernie Sanders' state. He's for those who don't know, he's a U.S. senator for the state of Vermont. He has been the most popular senator in the country for quite a while, and before that, he was the most popular member of the House of Representatives for quite a while. So, you know, many years of being extremely popular, both around the country and in his own state. Around the country to those who knew of him. Of course, in his own state, most people know of him. So, yeah, expect him to do well in Vermont. The simulation is portraying that rather well. It says here, Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 54% of the vote in Vermont. Now, notice, that's nowhere near 100% of the vote. But, with several other candidates, 54% is still doing pretty good. If it was Bernie Sanders against one other candidate, which it might be by then, because other candidates might drop out, but at this point in the race, it's not. And so the simulation, is giving us scenarios where candidates have dropped out and scenarios where they haven't dropped out, and it's basically, like I said, it's taking an average. At least that's my understanding of how it works. So, like I said, it's forecasting on average that Bernie Sanders will have 54% of the vote in Vermont at this point in its calculations. Later on, we should get more accurate readings, hopefully, as time goes on. But again, we the people make these odds. So, we can learn something from these. It's insightful. It's interesting to look at. But if you don't like the way it's going, don't let it get you down, because, you can do something about it. And if you like the way it's going, do something about that too. Because remember, if it's going the way you want it to go, it's because people who want it to go your way are fighting for it. So be one of those people. Whether you agree with me or with someone else, or you're all on your own, chances are whatever you think is best, there's probably a bunch of other people who think the same way as you do. So, who's right? I don't know. But fight for what you think is right, because you just might be. And, if we're lucky, the most people are going to be fighting for what really is right. If we're not so lucky, maybe the most people will be fighting for completely the wrong thing. But that's how this thing works. Democracy isn't about all agreeing with each other. It's not blue no matter who or red no matter who. We each have our own opinion, and you don't have to vote somebody else's opinion just because somebody tells you voting your own opinion is voting for something other than your own opinion. I mean, like so many of independents supporting Bernie in 2016 were told that their vote for Bernie Sanders was a vote for Donald Trump by Hillary Clinton supporters, and told that their vote for Bernie Sanders was a vote for Hillary Clinton by Donald Trump supporters. When meanwhile it was neither. It was a vote for Bernie Sanders. And in the 2020 general election, I will be voting for Bernie Sanders, regardless who gets nominated. I'm not a Democrat. Again, I'm an independent. I don't owe the Democratic Party anything. And sure, if somebody else gets nominated, I'm sure Bernie will be asking me to vote for whoever they nominated, because he sees that as the best way to beat Donald Trump. And statistically, historically, I'd say he's right. But we can change history. And this is one of the things he's trying to tell us. It's not about him, it's about us. So I'm with making a better future. I'm with, saying, yes, we can make that difference. And that's a risky position. But taking that risk is the only way that we have the possibility of making that gain. And I think a lot of people should be aware right now that we are in a dangerous situation with global warming going on at an alarming rate. The scientists now figuring out that it's worse than they thought it was. And if we don't get somebody like Bernie Sanders in there, somebody who can really push hard for change, and somebody who understands that it is about us and not about that candidate, unlike Joe Biden, who's going me, I, me, all my, no, that's not going to get it done for us. No one person can do this. No candidate can do it without the help of the people and saying, oh, well, this demographic will vote for me, therefore I can do it all by myself. That's not helping us. So I'm just saying, a bunch of us will be voting for Bernie Sanders no matter who gets nominated, and I hope he wins, whether he's nominated or not. Will he take the position if we vote him in and he wasn't nominated? I think so. Will he help us with that? Well, probably only if we make such a strong showing that it looks like there's no other way to beat Donald Trump at that point. And I don't know if we'll be able to make that strong of a showing, but I, for one, will try. And I know I'm not alone. Anyway, moving on. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 54% of the vote in Vermont. He has a 93% chance of winning the most votes. Much better than the second most likely winner, Biden, who has a 3% chance. That's a pretty big margin. I know, goes without saying. Any rate, scrolling to the next contest. That would be the American Samoas. Oh, this is also a Super Tuesday contest. Who will win the American Samoa caucuses? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 26% of the vote in American Samoa. He has a 32% chance of winning the most votes, slightly better than Biden, who has a 26% chance. Michigan on March 10th. Not a Super Tuesday contest. This will be about a week after Super Tuesday on Tuesday, March 10th. And there are also several contests on that date. So, starting with this one in the list, who will win the Michigan primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 32% of the vote in Michigan. He has a 52% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 23% chance. So basically a little over double the chances that Biden has, and this site is calling that a bit better. I think that's I wouldn't say that's a bit, but that's what the site says, so I'm just reading it. The next one listed on March 10th is Washington. That's the state, not the capital, D.C. Who will win the Washington primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 34% of the vote in Washington. He has a 61% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Biden, who has a 15% chance. Who will win the Missouri primary? By the way, if I pronounce any of these places in a way that you disagree with the pronunciation of, feel free to comment about that. Let me know what pronunciation you think would be better, and whatever way you can figure out how to express that, and why. I will use my pronunciations, my preferred pronunciation, generally speaking, for the English language. If it's a name that's not English, sometimes the pronunciation is going to be a hybrid of the language the name came from and how English phonetics would handle it. But again, I've got to do it my way because there are in some cases many different ways, and no matter which way I pick, somebody out there is going to say that's wrong. So I'm going with the ones that I've picked, and that's the best I can do. But I'm not above learning. Of course, if I can learn, maybe I'll change to something that could be better in some sense. Anyway, who will win the Missouri primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 26% of the vote in Missouri. He has a 38% chance of winning the most votes, slightly better than Biden, who has a 30% chance. Who will win the Mississippi primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 29% of the votes in Mississippi. He has a 42% chance of winning the most votes, slightly better than Biden, who has a 35% chance. Who will win the Idaho primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 31% of the vote in Idaho. He has a 52% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 23% chance. Also on March 10th, North Dakota. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 29% of the vote in North Dakota. He has a 49% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than the second most likely winner, Biden, who has a 19% chance. That's, Bernie's got, again, better than double the odds according to this simulation. The wording they're using there is a bit better. And also on March 10th, Democrats abroad. Who will win the Democrats abroad primary? And as I was saying earlier, not all of the contests are states. This one is obviously not a state. In fact, this one is technically not even a location. It's more of the lack of any one specific location that that has a name for it as a place. This is just like people spread out in other places. Any rate, Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 32% of the vote for Democrats abroad. He has a 51% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Biden, who has a 20% chance. And moving on to Saturday, March 14th. Who will win the Northern Marianas caucuses? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 31% of the vote in the Northern Marianas. He has a 41% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 24% chance. Then on to Tuesday, March 17th. Who will win the Florida primary? And there are 4 different contests on this particular day, by the way. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 30% of the votes in Florida. He has a 46% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 31% chance. Again, according to this simulation, having been run repeatedly and averaged out. Illinois. In French, it's Illinois. Illinois, as a lot of the locals pronounce it, would be the next one. So, Illinois. Who will win the Illinois primary? It's again March 17th. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 30% of the vote in Illinois. He has a 48% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 23% chance. Who will win the Ohio primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 31% of the vote in Ohio. He has a 50% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 23% chance. Now notice 50% plus 23% does not equal 100%. That's because it's only showing two of the candidates, the two most likely, according to the simulation, the two most likely on the average to win the most votes. Other candidates are taking up the rest of those percentages of the chance. And so moving on to Tuesday, March 24th. Oh, wait, no, before we do, there's one more left on March 17th. That would be Arizona. So who will win the Arizona primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 32% of the vote in Arizona. He has a 54% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Biden, who has a 22% chance. Okay, now moving on to March 24th, Georgia. The only contest on that day. Who will win the Georgia primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 31% of the vote in Georgia. He has a 43% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 29% chance. Moving on to March 29th, one contest there in Puerto Rico. Who will win the Puerto Rico primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 33% of the vote in Puerto Rico. He has a 46% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 27% chance. Moving on to April 4th, Saturday, April 4th. Several contests on that day. I think 5 of them. So, Louisiana. Who will win the Louisiana primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 32% of the vote in Louisiana. He has a 46% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 25% chance. And the state of Hawaii, where Tulsi Gabbard is a representative, and I would expect she would do quite well in that state if she's still running at that point in time. But the simulation is again showing averages, and some of those averages include, different candidates having dropped out by that point in time because there's all those other contests before then. We shall see. It says, who will win the Hawaii primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 36% of the vote in Hawaii. He has a 48% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 23% chance. Alaska, also on Saturday, April 4th. Who will win the Alaska primary? Again, according to this simulation so far, Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 38% of the vote in Alaska. He has a 50% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 23% chance. And one more on April 4th. Who will win the Wyoming caucuses? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 35% of the vote in Wyoming. He has a 42% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than the second most likely winner, Biden, who has a 23% chance. Moving on to Tuesday, April 7th. One contest on that day. That would be Wisconsin. Who will win the Wisconsin primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 34% of the vote in Wisconsin. He has a 49% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 22% chance. Next comes the contests on April 28th. There are like half a dozen of those. New York. Who will win the New York primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 33% of the vote in New York. He has a 44% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 24% chance. Again, according to this simulation. If there are any other very thorough simulations out there, I'd like to know about them, because I don't think I do know of any. So again, if anybody knows, please leave me a comment, let me know, and maybe I'll make a video on, that one or those ones as well. We'll see. Moving on to Pennsylvania. Let's see, I did read this one, right? 33% forecasted to have win an average of 33% of the vote in New York. He has a 44% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 24% chance. Yeah. Pennsylvania. Who will win the Pennsylvania primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 32% of the vote in Pennsylvania. He has a 44% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 29% chance. Maryland, also on April 28th, Tuesday, April 28th. Who will win the Maryland primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 32% of the vote in Maryland. He has a 41% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 30% chance. Connecticut. Who will win the Connecticut primary? Or Connecticut, if you prefer that. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 34% of the vote in Connecticut. He has a 48% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 25% chance. Who will win the Rhode Island primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 37% of the vote in Rhode Island. He has a 52% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 23% chance. Sorry about the noise in the background. I live in a big city. We get these things, and I don't have soundproof walls. And Delaware, the last one listed here on April 28th, Tuesday, April 28th. I don't know what order during the day they'll actually be happening. But yeah, last one listed here. Biden is forecasted to win an average of 33% of the vote in Delaware. He has a 43% chance of winning the most votes, slightly better than the second most likely winner, Sanders, who has a 36% chance. So this is a second one where it's showing Biden as being the most likely to win, and again, in that case, Sanders ends up the second most likely to win. So basically it's showing them as pretty much tied for the number of delegates. It says Biden is forecasted to win an average of 8 pledged delegates. And Sanders is predicted to win 7 delegates. So so Biden would get one more than Bernie if this prediction comes true. And again, we can fight that. We can, people who want Biden to get more delegates can fight for that. People who want Sanders to get more delegates can fight for that, because we can change the odds. And no matter which side you're on, I would encourage you to try to do that. Do your best to change the odds. Don't just go, well, these are the odds, just let it happen. Because that's what makes the odds more against you than they would have been if you fought for odds in your favor. Just saying. So, moving on from Delaware on April 28th, to Kansas on May 2nd, Saturday, May 2nd. Who will win the Kansas primary? There's Kansas and Guam on this day. So, who will win the Kansas primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 36% of the vote in Kansas. He has a 45% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 25% chance. And also on May 2nd, who will win the Guam Caucuses? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 34% of the vote in Guam. He has a 42% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 27% chance. Moving on to May 5th, a single contest that day in Indiana. Who will win the Indiana primary? According to the calculations at this time, this simulation says Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 31% of the vote in Indiana. He has a 41% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Buttigieg, or Buttigieg. I'm not sure exactly how you're supposed to pronounce that. It's funny, I heard a news reporter saying something recently. He was trying to hype up Pete, and he said something about, well, only a year ago, people didn't even know how to pronounce his name. I'm thinking, and a year later, that hasn't changed. Yeah, if we're going by English phonetics, B-U-T-T would be butt, I-G would be ig, except for the fact that the G is followed by an I or an E, in this case both, which would make it a J sound, and the last G is not followed by an I or an E, so that would be a hard G, a G sound. So, Buttigieg is what I would get out of that. Buttigieg. Again, the I-E, I'm pronouncing it IE. There are possible variations of that in English phonetics. Buttigieg, don't know again which set of phonetics you want to go with, but I'm doing the best I can with pronunciation here of whatever words come along. So again, I'm a linguist. I have an interest in these sorts of things. If anybody has something to say about it, please leave a comment and let me know, and see where it goes from there. At any rate, so yeah, it says Sanders has a 41% chance of winning the most votes in Indiana, a bit better than Buttigieg, who has 24% chance. So moving on from May 5th to Tuesday, May 12th. 2 contests on that day. Who will win the Nebraska primary on Tuesday, May 12th? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 32% of the vote in Nebraska. He has a 45% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 24% chance. And who will win the West Virginia primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 34% of the vote in West Virginia. He has a 45% chance of winning the most votes of any candidate, a bit better than Biden, who has a 25% chance. Moving on to Tuesday, May 19th. A couple of contests that day as well. Who will win the Oregon primary? Now, I say Oregon. I think most of the people there pronounce it Oregon. I'm sure there are variations both within and without the area, but who will win the Oregon primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 35% of the vote in Oregon. He has a 48% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than the second most likely winner, Biden, who has a 24% chance. So Biden's got half the chances of winning the most votes that Bernie has in Oregon. Kentucky. Who will win the Kentucky primary on May 19th? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 34% of the vote in Kentucky. He has a 45% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 25% chance. Moving on to Tuesday, June 2nd. And there are several contests that day. Who will win the New Jersey primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 35% of the vote in New Jersey. He has a 45% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 27% chance. Again, according to the forecasts of FiveThirtyEight.com at this time. Who will win the New Mexico primary? Also on Tuesday, June 2nd. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 37% of the vote in New Mexico. Sounds like a motorcycle out there. Rather loud. He has a 48% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 25% chance. And now the other Washington, D.C. Who will win the District of Columbia primary? Also on Tuesday, June 2nd. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 35% of the vote in the District of Columbia. He has a 43% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 28% chance. Who will win the Montana primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 33% of the vote in Montana. He has a 44% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 25% chance. And South Dakota. Who will win the South Dakota primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 33% of the vote in South Dakota. He has a 45% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 25% chance. Again, that's a pretty big gap in my opinion, but reading the wording as it is on the screen on this website. Moving on to Saturday, June 6th. And this would be the last event of the Democratic Party's primary season. Who will win the Virgin Islands caucuses? And this simulation has predicted Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 34% of the vote in the Virgin Islands. It says that he has a 40% chance of winning the most votes there, and that's a bit better than second most likely winner Biden, who has a 27% chance. So about 1 in 4. And that's it for the Democratic Party primaries. According to 538.com, specifically projects.538.com/2020-primary-forecast. So who will win the 2020 Democratic primary? More than likely Bernie Sanders. But only if we fight for it. Because again, we make the odds. A big part of what this simulation is simulating is us fighting for it. So, yeah. Fight for what you think is right. Fight for who you think is best. That's all I can say. And, even if you disagree with me on who the best candidate is, I suggest you vote when you get the chance. If you have that opportunity, vote for whoever you think is best. And if you can't vote, if you're, one of the people who is denied an option to vote, if you're, not a citizen, or if you've been convicted of a felony and not allowed to vote because of it, or whatever the case might be, whether you can vote or not, don't forget that you can influence other people. You can talk to other people about why you think a particular candidate should be voted for, and why you think it's better to vote for who they actually support, or who they best support, or who they think is best, than to not vote at all. And also you can express your feelings on the idea of a lesser of two evils vote. Again, my feelings are that it's better to not vote at all than to vote for the lesser of two evils, but I am not by any means recommending not voting at all, because it is better to vote whatever you think is best than to vote for than to not vote at all. If what you think is best is to vote for the lesser of two evils, well then there's a bit of a conflict there, isn't there? So you'll have to make up your own mind. But I'm just suggesting you keep in mind that a vote for the lesser of two evils is a vote for evil. If you vote for a bad candidate and that bad candidate gets elected, accept some of the responsibility for it. And if you vote for a bad candidate because other people are going to vote for a bad candidate, and one of the reasons they're voting for that bad candidate is to keep out the candidate that you're planning to vote for, don't forget that you're helping to make them vote for that candidate. You're helping to convince them that they need to vote for a candidate that you think is the worst, because you're voting for the one that they think is the worst, when you could be instead telling them you're going to vote for the one you think is the best, who is probably not who they think is the worst. It's one of the reasons why so many of us are planning on voting for Bernie Sanders in the general election, no matter who gets nominated. Because sure, there are some people who have been told he's a communist and that makes him the worst. But first off, he's not a communist. Second off, even if he was, they don't even know what communism really is. They've only been told that dictators have called their dictatorship communism, and therefore communism is a bad thing. Bernie is a democratic socialist. Democratic socialism, like any other system, doesn't succeed all of the time. But if you look up successful cases of democratic socialism, you'll find it's a pretty good system. And there are a lot of such examples out there. So instead of listening to the propaganda about, here's a failed example of socialism, or here's an example of a communist dictator, which is, by the way, a complete contradiction in terms, oxymoron. There's no such thing as a communist dictator, because dictatorship is not communism. Just saying. And communism is not socialism either. They're very different things. Do they have some overlap, some similarities? Sure. All of the systems have some overlap and similarities. So, but bottom line is that Bernie Sanders is very much for democracy and very much for putting society first, which is what he calls socialism is really all about. That the people come first, and everything else is secondary. And shouldn't it really be all about the people? I mean, sure, rich people can be helpful, but so can poor people, given the chance to do so. The rich people tend to get more done because they have the advantage of having lots of money. Give the advantage of having some money to other people who aren't rich, and you might find that a whole lot of them can do a lot of good as well. And this is one of the things I really liked about what Andrew Yang had to say. I've been a strong supporter of guaranteed universal basic income since before I had ever heard anyone else talk about it, basically all my life. And I do hope that Bernie Sanders will decide to at least implement some small universal guaranteed basic income, and then see whether it seems more deserving of being lessened or removed, or more deserving of being increased and supported more. There are experiments being done in some places with universal guaranteed basic income, and the results of those experiments can be looked at and learned from. So, at any rate, I'm going to go ahead and end this video. It's an hour and 11 minutes long, going on an hour and 12 minutes long. Thank you to anyone who watches this. Again, please share it. Check out the other videos that I've made. A lot of the videos on the Eminent Reflection YouTube channel are unlisted, but if you look at the playlists on the channel, a lot of those videos are in those in one or more of those playlists and can be found that way. And it's one of the reasons why they're unlisted otherwise, and won't show up in a search or show up on the list of uploaded videos, but they will show up in the playlists that they're listed in. If you come across one in a playlist that you think should be otherwise listed, should be available on a search, if you leave a comment on one of them and you want your comment to be seen by more people, you want it to show up in the search for that reason, if you click the thumbs up because you like a particular video, if if it's got a lot of thumbs up and you think it should be out there searchable for that reason, leave a comment, let me know, and I will do my best to try to keep up on those comments. And if I see people asking for an unlisted one to be listed, I will definitely take that under consideration, and we'll see what happens. At any rate, thank you very much for watching, and if you like the channel, you want to see more of this sort of stuff, maybe consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Take care.